I didn't cancel my vacation when my mother-in-law was hospitalized. She had faked a medical emergency twice before to keep us home. So let me start with the first time, because context matters here. My husband Derek and I had been together for 4 years before we finally booked a real trip. Not a long weekend, an actual 2-week vacation to Portugal. We'd been saving since before we got married. We had a folder on our desktop called Portugal 2023 with restaurants and day trips and everything. 2 days before we were supposed to leave, Derek's mom Sandra called saying she was having chest pains and was being rushed to the ER. Derek went pale and immediately said we had to cancel. I said okay. We lost the flights, got a partial refund on the hotel, and drove 2 hours to the hospital. By the time we got there, Sandra was sitting up in bed eating crackers and watching TV. The doctor told Derek she'd had some elevated stress markers, which could mean anything, and that she was free to go home. No diagnosis, no medication. She was discharged that afternoon. She hugged Derek for a long time and told him she felt so much better now that he was there. I told myself it was a coincidence. The second time was 18 months later. Derek's best friend was getting married in Ireland, and we were going as part of the wedding party. Sandra called the night before our flight saying she'd fainted at home and the paramedics were there. Derek wanted to cancel again. This time, I pushed back a little. I said, let's find out what's actually happening before we make any decisions. We waited 2 hours. Turned out she'd gotten dizzy standing up too fast, which the EMTs attributed to dehydration, and she refused to go to the hospital at all. She'd literally called to tell us she was fine after scaring us into thinking she wasn't. Derek said she was probably just lonely. I watched him say that and didn't respond. We went to Ireland. She called Derek 4 times while we were there. So when we booked this trip, a full 10 days in Japan, something we'd been planning for over a year, something we'd talked about since our first date because Derek's grandfather was Japanese and he'd never been. I told Derek before we even bought the tickets that if something happened with Sandra right before we left, we were going to need proof before we canceled. He didn't like that. He said I was being cynical. I said I was being realistic. He said those aren't the same thing. I said fine, maybe not, but I wasn't losing another trip. Tickets were non-refundable. We left in 9 days. Sandra called 5 days out. Derek answered while I was folding laundry. I heard his voice change from the other room, that certain flatness he gets when something's wrong. He came in and said his mom had been taken to the hospital by ambulance. Possible cardiac event. His aunt had called from the ER. I sat down on the bed. I asked which hospital. He told me. I asked if we could call the ER directly and speak to a nurse. He looked at me like I'd suggested something obscene. I said I'm not canceling this trip without knowing what we're actually dealing with. He said his mom is in the hospital. What more did I need to know? I said the last 2 times she was in the hospital, she was fine by the time we arrived. He said this is different. I asked how. He said he could feel it. I said that wasn't enough. We argued for an hour. At the end of it, I said I was going on the trip. He could do whatever he needed to do, but I wasn't canceling. He came with me. His aunt texted him updates the whole first day. Possible cardiac event became irregular heartbeat. Irregular heartbeat became stress-induced. By the time we landed in Tokyo, Sandra had been discharged, put on a low dose of a beta blocker she'd later stopped taking, and had already posted a photo on Facebook from her kitchen saying she was feeling blessed and so grateful for her family's love. Derek didn't talk to me for the first 2 days of the trip. On day 3, sitting outside a ramen place in Shinjuku at like 9 p.m., he finally said he felt guilty. I said I understood that. He said he didn't know how to stop feeling guilty. I said I knew that too. He said he wasn't sure what to believe anymore about his mom. I didn't say anything to that. We had a good trip. Really good, actually. When we got home, there was a dinner at his parents' house that I knew was going to be a thing. Sandra was there looking completely fine, and she hugged Derek for a very long time and didn't hug me at all. His aunt Janet kept giving me this look across the table. Finally, Janet said something like, I'm just glad everything turned out okay, given some people decided the trip couldn't wait. I put my fork down. I said, Sandra, this is the 3rd time you've ended up in the hospital right before we were supposed to go somewhere. The first 2 times were nothing. This time was also nothing. I don't think that's a coincidence. The table went completely quiet. Sandra looked at Derek. Derek looked at his plate. She said, I was sick. I could have had a heart attack. I said, but you didn't. She said, you don't know what it's like to be alone and scared. I said, you're right. But I do know what it's like to lose 2 trips and almost lose a 3rd because of emergencies that weren't emergencies. Derek's dad cleared his throat. Janet started to say something. Sandra's eyes filled up and she said to Derek, are you going to let her talk to me like this? Derek picked up his fork and said, she's not wrong, Mom. Sandra hasn't called Derek in 11 days.